Part 9. Ballingarry, County Tipperary, 29 July 1848. The rain began before dawn, not heavily, just enough to soak every coat and turn every lane into mud. No one complained. By then, discomfort had become so ordinary that it scarcely deserved mention. Word passed quietly through the camp. The police are nearby. How many? No one knows. They're moving toward Ballingarry. Within minutes the volunteers were gathering, blankets rolled, pikes lifted, the few muskets carefully checked, cartridges counted, again and again. Kieran watched Liam examine his powder horn. Still 7? Liam smiled weakly. 5 now. What happened to the other 2? I spilled one. Patrick clapped him on the shoulder. Then make the 5 count. The columns moved through the dripping countryside. No drums, no bugles, only boots sinking into wet earth. Thousands of thoughts. Almost no conversation. Around mid-morning they reached rising ground overlooking Ballingarry. The village seemed strangely peaceful. Smoke drifted from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Children had disappeared indoors. Even the birds seemed unusually quiet. William Smith O'Brien rode slowly along the line. He removed his hat. My friends, his voice was calm. There are police ahead. No one moved. I intend to ask them to surrender peacefully. Several men exchanged uncertain glances. If they lay down their arms, there need be no bloodshed today. Kieran glanced towards Patrick. I hope they listen. Patrick answered honestly, so do I. The volunteers continued forward. Then someone pointed. There. A farmhouse stood beyond the stone wall, solidly built, whitewashed, surrounded by a cabbage patch and small fields. Smoke still rose from the chimney. The widow McCormack's. The name passed quietly through the ranks. Inside were members of the police constabulary. They had withdrawn there after being confronted by the growing crowd. The widow's children remained inside with them. No one outside wished harm upon the family. That fact weighed heavily on everyone. O'Brien rode forward beneath a white handkerchief tied to a stick. Several volunteers watched anxiously. He called upon the police to surrender. His words drifted across the wet fields. The reply could not be heard. Only the posture of the officers at the windows, rigid, determined. Patrick exhaled slowly. This isn't going to end well. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The waiting became almost unbearable. Some volunteers shifted nervously. Others gripped pikes so tightly their knuckles whitened. Kieran realised his own hands were trembling. He tried hiding them. Patrick noticed anyway. So were mine. Then a sharp crack. A musket fired. No one was entirely certain who had fired first. History would argue about it for generations. The men in the field had no such luxury. Within seconds more shots rang out. White smoke drifted from the farmhouse windows. The battle had begun. Down! Patrick shouted. The nearest volunteers threw themselves behind a low stone wall. Another volley struck the ground before them. Fragments of limestone flew into the air. Someone cried out. A young volunteer clutched his shoulder. Another helped drag him to safety. Liam raised his musket carefully above the wall. He fired once. The recoil nearly knocked him backwards. Smoke engulfed him. When it cleared, he looked utterly bewildered. I've no idea if I hit anything. Patrick almost laughed. I doubt anyone does. Around them the field dissolved in confusion. There were no neat lines, no polished manoeuvres. Groups of volunteers moved independently. Some sought cover. Others attempted to return fire. Men carrying only pikes could do little except wait and hope for an opportunity that never came. Kieran crouched low behind the wall. His heart hammered so violently he wondered if everyone could hear it. Another shot struck the stone inches above his head. Small chips stung his face. He instinctively ducked lower. Patrick looked at him. You all right? Kieran nodded, though he wasn't entirely certain. Hours seemed compressed into minutes. The firing came in bursts, long silences followed by sudden volleys. Rain mixed with drifting gun smoke until the air itself seemed grey. At one point, Kieran looked across the field. He saw volunteers carrying water to wounded men. Others tore strips from shirts to bind injuries. One elderly farmer knelt openly in the mud, praying over a wounded youth. No one stopped him, not even the bullets. The strangest thing, Kieran thought later, was how ordinary everything felt. There were no glorious charges, no triumphant speeches, only frightened men trying to look after one another while hoping not to die. Near midday, Eamon crawled beside them. His face was streaked with mud. I've counted. Patrick frowned. Counted what? Our muskets. Go on. We've more men than weapons by 20-1. Patrick looked toward the farmhouse. And they've walls. Eamon nodded. And we've cabbages. Despite everything, Patrick smiled. So we do. Even Ciarán laughed, only briefly. But he laughed. As afternoon wore on, ammunition began running low. Liam emptied his powder horn. That's it. Patrick looked at the others. Anyone? Heads shook, one after another. Very few cartridges remained. Far off, another sound reached them. Hoofs. Many of them. Someone climbed the wall just enough to see. His face drained of colour. Reinforcements. The word spread rapidly. Government troops, more police, fresh ammunition, fresh horses, fresh men. Everything the volunteers lacked. For a long moment no one spoke. The reality settled over the field with the same quiet certainty as the rain. This was over. Not because the courage had failed, because powder had. Because walls were stronger than pikes, because determination alone could not stop bullets. William Smith O'Brien's order travelled down the line. Withdraw. No shame, no panic. Simply the acknowledgement of a truth every man had already understood. Patrick slowly rose. He looked at Ciarán. Stay close. I will. The volunteers began pulling back in small groups across the rain-soaked fields, not as a defeated army, but as ordinary men, leaving behind a battle they had never truly possessed the means to win. Ciarán looked back only once. The widow McCormick's farmhouse still stood. Smoke curled from shattered windows. The cabbage patch lay trampled beneath hundreds of muddy footprints. He found himself thinking that history would remember this place, yet history would never know what it had sounded like. The laughter, the prayers, the frightened breathing behind stone walls, the whispered reassurances between friends, the promises made in the rain. Those belonged only to the ordinary men who had lived them. Part 10. Ballingarry, County Tipperary, 29 July 1848. The order to withdraw moved through the field like a whisper, not shouted, not announced, simply understood. For a few moments no one moved. The volunteers had spent months imagining what fighting would be like. They had imagined courage. They had imagined standing firm. They had imagined victory. No one had imagined this. The quiet realization that there was nothing more they could do. Patrick placed a hand on Ciarán's shoulder. Now. They moved. The retreat was not a rout, not at first. The men withdrew in groups, helping those who were wounded. A young volunteer stumbled beside them, unable to walk properly. The two older men supported him between them. One carried his pike, the other carried his coat. No one left anything behind that could be carried, especially not a friend. The rain continued falling. It softened the ground beneath their feet. Every step pulled at their boots. Every breath felt heavier. Behind them came the sounds they dreaded, commands, movement, the distant noise of approaching troops. Not close yet, but coming. Eamon looked back. How many? Patrick shook his head. Don't what? Don't count them. Eamon understood. Numbers would only make things worse. They crossed the stone wall into an open field. Ciarán immediately noticed how exposed they were. Too open, too wide, no cover. Keep moving, Patrick said. No one needed convincing. Then came the shots. Different from before, more organised, more distant, but unmistakable. Men dropped ahead of them. The retreating volunteers scattered instinctively. Some fell flat, others ran. Fear, the most ancient human instinct, moved faster than any order. Ciarán felt Patrick grab his arm. Stay with me, I am. They ran, not like soldiers, like young men trying to reach tomorrow. Ciarán would remember strange things afterwards, not the sound of gunfire, not the fear, not even the sight of men falling. He would remember the mud, the way it clung to his boots, the way he would remember a bird suddenly rising from a hedgerow. He would remember Eamon swearing because he had lost one shoe. He'd remember Patrick laughing despite everything. Because somehow, even while running for their lives, they were still themselves. They reached a narrow lane bordered by thick hedges. Men poured into it from the fields. Some exhausted, some injured, some silent. The great gathering of volunteers had become scattered groups of frightened individuals. The army they had imagined had disappeared. Only the men remained. Ciarán leaned against the hedge, trying to catch his breath. Patrick placed a hand against the stone wall. Everyone. Eamon nodded. Liam appeared moments later. His face was pale, but he was alive. Tom was missing. No one spoke his name, not yet. A young volunteer nearby sat on the ground. He struggled to breathe, I thought we'd stand forever. Patrick looked at him. No one stands forever. The young man looked ashamed. Patrick shook his head. This isn't failure. He pointed toward the road. You're still here. Kieran understood then. The battle had changed nothing about what mattered. They had not become brothers because they won. They'd become brothers because they had stayed. The group began moving again, slowly, carefully. The hedgerows offered some protection, and for a brief moment they believed they might escape. Then the shot came. Kieran did not hear it clearly, perhaps because it came from behind. Perhaps because the world suddenly seemed to become strangely quiet. He felt something strike him, hard, unexpected, like being hit by a stone. He stumbled. Kieran! Patrick's voice sounded far away. The ground rushed upwards. He fell forward into the grass. For several seconds he did not understand. He tried to rise. His arms pushed against the earth. They failed. Patrick and Eamon reached him. No. Patrick's voice changed. Not a command, not reassurance. Plea. No. They turned him carefully. There was blood. Too much. The wound was in his back. I can walk. The words came automatically. Everyone knew they were untrue. Patrick looked at him. Don't waste your strength. I need to... No, Patrick's eyes were wet. You don't. The sound of pursuit continued in the distance. They could not stay. They could not leave him. Not Kieran. Together they dragged him toward the nearest hedgerow, a small hollow beneath the tangled branches, the kind of place where a young man had once hidden from the world. How strange, Kieran thought. His life had begun beneath hedges, and perhaps it would end there too. Eamon tore cloth from his shirt. His hands shook. I don't know what I'm doing. Kieran smiled faintly. Neither do I. You're not supposed to agree. That made them laugh, a little. Patrick knelt beside him. You remember what you said? What? About the cottage. Kieran looked confused. The dog. A faint smile appeared. The dog. And the garden. Aye. Patrick swallowed. You'll have it. Kieran looked at him. Will I? Patrick nodded firmly. Aye. Because sometimes friends tell impossible truths to dying men. Not because they believe them. Because love requires it. The footsteps of retreating men grew quieter. The battle was over. The rebellion was ending. But beneath the hedgerow, 3 friends still remained. After a while, Kieran opened his eyes. Patrick? I want you to know something. What? He looked at the faces above him, the men who had become his family. I was never supposed to be here. Patrick frowned. What do you mean? Kieran smiled weakly. I mean... His breath caught. I wasn't looking for Ireland. No one spoke. I wasn't looking for rebellion. A pause. I wasn't even looking for friends. Patrick looked confused. Then why? Kieran closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was almost amusement there, because I heard there was food. For a moment, silence. Then Eamon laughed, not because it was funny, because he didn't know what else to do. Patrick lowered his head. You foolish man. Kieran smiled. I know. But then slowly they heard horses, more soldiers, the world moving on. But beneath the hedgerow, Patrick held his friend's hand, and Kieran Burke, who had once believed himself to be the last person left in Ireland, was no longer alone.